Thank you very much. Let's move on then to item 6 on the agenda, which is a paper on integration, the Better Care Fund. Jane.
Thank you, Chairman. This paper was one that was prepared by Bill, so I am reporting it on his behalf, but something that I am also fairly involved with. And what the paper sets out is our approach to integration and looks at it both through the Better Care Fund but also through the wider work that we're undertaking. Firstly, I wanted just to remind the board that integration of health and social care is not only a key priority for us, but it's also a statutory duty for us to promote integration. But I think the point I really wanted to make was actually it's the right thing to do. So it might be a statutory responsibility, but it is the right thing to do for patients. And anybody that will have seen the news this morning will have picked up that there is quite a lot of media coverage and concern around patients being able to get the right level of care from either health or social services within their own homes. There's also quite a lot of confusion about what integration means, and so some time ago we spent a day with a huge range of people from all over England, including many patients and carers, to talk about what integration meant to them. And so as a result of that, we developed a terminology that was agreed through National Voices, and it's that we use as our approach to integration. And I know that there are different. Well, I think we ended up with something like 126 definitions. So we've identified what we believe, and working with carers and patients, what they think is important. I think the other thing I wanted to point out early on is that not only is this the right thing to do, but it is the only way that we'll be able to truly provide patient-centred care close to people's homes in a way that actually fits with how the service needs to develop. And we have to look at major change in order to respond to our challenges around an ageing population, around responding to some of the concerns we've had and failures in quality, and to make sure we've got the best use of taxpayers' money. We know that the need for health and social care is increasing and will continue to do so. And in order to address that in the best possible way, actually putting patients at the centre of what we do and wrapping services around them, rather than having multiple organisations and processes, is got to be the way forward. So we're looking at integration in 4 different ways. We've got a series of integration pioneers, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. We've done some work with our strategy and our planning work, and we've also got the Better Care Fund. And then finally, we're looking at a much wider programme of integrated care with all our national partners. So if I just talk a little bit about the integration pioneers, that was set up last year by Minister of State for Care Services Norman Lamb, and as a result we asked for expressions of interest, and we identified 14 integration pioneers that are across England, and those were considered to be looking at innovative ways of doing this. They were actually concentrating on using a range of different tools and techniques in order to really provide integrated care. And what we've done recently is we've identified senior leaders from across the system. So we've got people from the Department of Health, from NHS England, from Monitor, Local Government Association, who are linked to each of these integration pioneers. And so, just as an aside, I'm linked to one in Cheshire, Ros is linked to one, and Bill's linked to one. I was talking to the integration pioneers down in Cornwall fairly recently about the way they've used the voluntary sector to really have an impact on patients. And I was talking to a doctor from the local clinical commissioning group who said, there were some patients that she really didn't know what else she could do to help them and to give them the best quality of life in their own homes. And by working with Age UK and other voluntary sectors, it's had a complete turnaround in their individual patients' ability to live at home, to feel much more positive. And when we talked earlier about mental health issues and the links between mental health and physical health, or physical illness and mental illness, it's absolutely fundamental that we look at those two things together. So we've got some really good pioneers that we're working with at the moment. In terms of our strategic planning, we've also identified those key characteristics that we want to look at, and within those, The work we're doing on expanded primary care at scale and the integration really helps our CCGs and our own commissioning services to really focus on what can we do to build those services around patients, which I think will make a significant difference. But I wanted to spend a bit more time on the Better Care Fund. So last summer, government announced that £3.8 billion would be used to create a Better Care Fund from April next year. And the idea is that that fund is a really important enabler to take that integration agenda forward. And Bill has led a lot of work. He's very experienced in this field. He's worked in local government. He's also an experienced NHS chief exec, and has worked in partnership with the Local Government Association, Department of Health, Department of Communities, etc., to really try and build a system that will help us to use this money in the best possible way. But it's not new money, and I think that's a really important point. And in order to do that, we need to change. In order to create that fund and to use that fund to look after people in their own homes and as close to their own homes as possible, and to link the money with social care. Not only do we need to change what we do in acute services in particular, but also to ensure that we put the governance and accountability around how that money's spent and spent the best possible way. So there's been quite a lot of work that's been put in place. There will be formal joint governance arrangements. Health and wellbeing boards will need to sign that off. NHS England we need to assure ourselves that money's being spent in the best possible way. It needs to be focused on patients. And we also need to ensure that we're able to change what happens in acute hospitals. So, for example, we anticipate that emergency activity will need to reduce by about 15%. And there will be a massive risk if we continue to have the same system of patients in hospitals and try and create this fund and have it in the system. So there's quite a lot of risk associated with this. But if we working together, having very clear framework within which this money is only put into like a joint pot, but actually used for the benefit of patients, I think we should transform that service and should be able to provide much better care for patients in their own homes. I can take questions from the paper, but for me, this gives us a massive opportunity, but it's an opportunity that we need to look at alongside understanding the risks and making sure that through our assurance process and the governance with both CCGs and NHS England more widely, local government, health and wellbeing boards, we truly ensure that we track what happens to it, that we wrap it around patients, and we see the changes in acute activity, admissions, managing discharges more appropriately, that actually can deliver what we want to deliver. So I'll leave it there, Chairman, if that's all right, and hopefully we can have a discussion and you can ask. Hopefully you'll be able to answer questions.
Well, Jane, I'm sure you will be able to. I think the thing that concerns the board, first of all, is that this is obviously the way in which we wish to proceed. It's one of our 6 principles of a sustainable healthcare system. I guess our concern is the level of risk and the timescale and the extraction of 2 billion from the acute sector over this timescale in a tightly constrained budget, the working in close integration with other partners, particularly with the health and wellbeing boards and with local government, to try and ensure that what comes out of this at the far end is continued high quality service to patients, albeit in different environments and in different contexts. And it's something that the board is going to want to track regularly the whole way through. I think this is one of the most challenging and most daunting things that lies ahead of us. So I'm sure other colleagues will have questions that they wish to put to you, but I would simply mark this up as something that I think carries very high risk, and we're going to want to follow very closely. Ed?
I have complete agreement that it's the right way to go and fully support it, but as I suspect you would know, I will start with how do we govern this? There's a long supply chain, it's new. We are very reliant on health and wellbeing boards. Yeah. I think the jury is out at the moment on whether they are sufficiently robust to be able to provide all the assurances we need. It will be us that end up in front of the PAC, the Health Select Committee and others. It won't be a Health and Wellbeing Board. So I think as we go forward from here, as we develop this, I think the Audit Committee for one and the Board really must have assurances that the dependencies that we are entirely reliant on for the proper use of public funds across the country as this money is dispersed are there, that there is no diversion of this money into other activities, and that it truly delivers value for money in the way which we strategically and passionately want to see integration happen on the ground. Without it, I think I'm sorry to say that we'll be back into the sort of is this really delivering what we want? And I think that's something we have to avoid at all costs.
Kieran, may I take a few
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
come back to you then? Kieran.
The other thing for me is getting it right locally, and how do we help people have the capability to make sure that the Health and Wellbeing Board and the CCG and the local area team in each geography is thinking, creatively about how to do things, but they have the capability of doing that kind of joined up working, and I mean that in a kind of organisational development sense, not just a content sense as well, because for me, one of the other places this will fail is it's not that people won't think what good integrated care projects might look like, because we've all heard about Torbay and everywhere else. It's how do we make those changes locally, and that's a skill in complex project management. So are we thinking about that as well as thinking about how we track the money, how we make sure it's doing the right kind of stuff? And my second point would be, we are asking DGHs in particular to spread their butter ever more thinly, and we really need to be worried about that.
Do you want to take those 2 points from Ed and Kieran, and then we'll invite others?
Okay. Well, firstly, I agree with both of you. I think the way this is being developed is that it's through local partnership. Clearly, NHS England and the Chief Executive of NHS England is responsible for and is accountable for the NHS money spend. So we have to make sure that we've got the appropriate governance and accountability in place for that. The way in which we are looking to do this is through local partnerships with our area teams, through CCGs, and we have commissioners and providers working together. We can't do this unless we have commissioners and providers working together alongside local government, and then through the Health and Wellbeing Boards. There is a framework and a series of expectations around what those local plans should look like. There is a clear also line of accountability through to ministers around what these local plans will look like. So we've got some significant oversight of that. And I also think that the work of the integration pioneers should show what the art of the possible is. We have, you talk about Torbay. Yes, we know that Torbay's been running for a very long time, so it does beg the question, why hasn't that been replicated elsewhere? We also know that people have tried to look at integration. They've talked about it. They've maybe dabbled around the edges a little bit, but actually doing something fundamentally that changes what happens to patients is very different. So I think the integration pioneers that are being supported to really push those boundaries, to challenge some of the rules that might be in place, to make things different. And for us, as those of us that are senior leaders, are there partly to identify what are the blocks in the system at the moment that's stopping people being able to do what's the right thing for patients. So we have got a series of actions in place, and we're doing this as a partnership. But you're absolutely right. Actually releasing that money from acute hospitals, changing the way how those organisations work, is risky. And for those that, if there were any provider chief execs around this table or medical or nurse directors around this table, my guess is they would say, we've heard this before and nothing's changed. We've heard that we're going to move people out of hospital. We've heard that we're going to do something different. And actually, in reality, we still get more and more people coming in through our doors. We have got some good examples from around the world, and in some parts of England where this is actually happening and is making a difference. So as well as looking at what the best practice might be in England, and in the UK, we're also looking at what best practice looks like outside of England and the UK. And I think there's some very, very good examples of where systems that have set up services in the community are having a real impact on the number of patients being admitted into hospital and the number of patients being cared for in their own homes. So we're looking at importing some of that learning as well.
I have in mind Victor, David and Ross.
Thank you. I think that my question's been partly answered already. I mean, it was really a question about how the governance is going to ensure that the pioneers are properly integrated with the activities, so that so that they're not running in a sort of a parallel line of action, and also so that where they're reliant upon unblocking experts, the unblocking experts have proper opportunity to be heard, so that whatever it is that they are suggesting is actually landing, because that's going to be key. I mean, that it's the key to really to the shift, so that the money is used in the right way, because it isn't really new money in any way. We need to make sure that we aren't running into parallel lines of activity.
Well, let's take another two or three.
Okay.
Victor.
I kind of want to take a positive view. I'm not suggesting that the remarks to date have been anything other than positive, but if you expect a relationship to be based on mistrust, then don't be surprised if that's what you get. And as I travel the country, I'm just a little concerned that this Better Care Fund is sometimes, not always, caricatured as they're taking our money off us or from the other side. It's not our money, it's actually the public's money. And while I absolutely, we need to make sure that public money is accountable and accounted for, this is an opportunity the like of which we haven't had before to redesign services in the interests of the public, who actually, to be honest, don't really give a monkeys about the demarcation between health and social care. They just want the service that works. So it strikes me that there are some things that we really need to do, and building on Kieran's remarks, I think there is something about how do we show what works, and there are some real examples of people who've taken that leap into the integration, basing it on a really clear understanding of the patient and the patient citizen, and using that as the basis on which they build the service, rather than using the budget as the basis on which they build the service structure and expecting the patient to guess whether they've got it right or not. And that's the only way you're going to get integration. So I'm really interested in how we use these as excuse removers, because this can be done, but we need the excuse removers, and we need the excuse removers to support the governance, so that the governance structure, the intention, is supported by the structure rather than the other way around, because that's the only way this is going to work. I happen to think this is something that NHS England could really lead. I mean, but in a co-produced way, and show how it's going to be. It maps onto the 6 characteristics perfectly. So we have a vested interest in doing this, and I want to start from a position of we can do this rather than of all the focusing on the risks. Actually, let's focus on the benefit.
Yeah, can I just a couple of points really. Well, one of them is the kind of is taking up what Victor said there. And this is the issue. This is the issue of intent. You know, what are we trying to do? And that's why I think the National Voices definition is so important. And there is a great danger that we'll lose that definition while we get into the gubbins of how it all works. And there's and we know what happens when there's is people lose sight of the real aim of it. And I think, you know, I can plan my care with people who work together to understand me and my carer, allowing me control and bringing together services to achieve outcomes important to me. That's really important. And in a sense, you can't say it enough. And one of the worries I have is in a sense you get the right. Okay, so yes, very interesting. Now let's talk about integration, which is all about something else, and that is the key. And it will involve lots and lots of people at different levels doing it. So that's my first point. Really keep hold of that all the time when we're doing it. The second thing is this thing about governance, and I'm you know, being the accounting officer for this money is a really significant and important an important thing. And we did design health and well, when we set up health and wellbeing boards originally, we gave very little guidance out, and around the country they have emerged in all sorts of different ways. Really, some of them fantastic, doing all sorts of interesting things, some of them less fantastic. And we will need, I think, in the next 6 months to get to a place where we have a understanding, a consistency about what they're doing. And I think the board needs to really, because that's going to be, the health and wellbeing board is going to wear this wins and loses this thing, and making sure that we get proper reports about that and we get a real robust system to enable us to do that, I think will be quite important. The third thing I'd say is that this is fantastic. Many of us have sat around in the NHS for a long time droning on about integration, and we've kind of, there are examples of it around, and Torbay is the one, there are others around the we've not been able to give the leap forward. This gives you the opportunity to the leap forward, but we need to be under no illusions about what this actually means, because this is not new money, and that what we're betting on here is that if we do that definition, that it will reduce the amount of activity in hospitals by 15%. That's what it means. That it's all based on that. That's quite a tough thing. We've never quite done it in that way. And if we can't do that, the only option we have to make the money go is to get hospitals to provide not a 4% improvement in efficiency through the tariff, but an 8%, which I think is simply impossible. I just do not see that as a reality. So I think by the middle of this year we should have a proper assessment about to judge whether this is possible or not, to make sure that we're absolutely clear about it. And then the final thing is, this is a very crowded space. Everyone's interested in this. They're in a government department, it don't seem to me, that thinks this might be a solution to some of their problems. So we need to make sure we create the space for local people to do it and not get overturned by it. So,
thank you. Ross.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the questions about the capability in the systems to do this and how we're contributing to building that capability. So 24 local systems across the country have got a programme of support to develop their systems leadership. And what we've been doing is working with the Department of Health, with the LGA, with other partners about how we spread that learning to the other health and wellbeing boards and other systems, and how we codify it so that, as you say, David, over time we can build on people's learning to say this is what great looks like. The second thing is about the technical capability. So some of the work that we're doing is how could you commission, say, for general practice and community services together? How can providers of care come together? So we're doing some quite technical work which people are telling us would enable them to make better use of money to meet the needs that people have said that they want when they describe the kind of care they want. So I just think there's quite a lot of going on in terms of the development that's going on as well, that we're investing our money in.
Thanks, Malcolm. I'm certainly in the same space as Victor, that we ought to see it as an opportunity, though I do fully understand the risk, particularly around the time scale for this change that you talked about. But I think we have to be careful to be clear that the risk is because it's risky, and it's not because local government is somehow involved. And I think I would be surprised if I was still in local government, David, to hear you say you set up health and wellbeing boards. Really, I think that local government saw that it was very much in the forefront of working locally to establish those. So we must do any assurance, I think, in the spirit of partnership with local government as well. I recognise how important it is, but we shouldn't give any suggestion that somehow or other we think that this is risky because local government is involved, as opposed to because it's actually fundamentally very difficult and challenging to do in the timescale that we've been given.
Can I respond?
Yes, I think you have a right of response.
Sorry. Heaven forbid would I think that I set up health and wellbeing boards. What we did, we sent the guidance out. That was all, the lack of it. That's the point I'd make.
The only point I make about risk on all of this is that
Sorry, can I just say one more thing? So I think that I might have been classed in the sort of doomsayers, and really, I think what I was trying to say was that, albeit that the integration objective is highly laudable, one of the really key things that prevents anything from landing is the fact that human nature likes to stay where it is. People are innately conservative. And so the fact that we are actually anticipating unblockers is wonderful, because we have to put some sort of resource and some sort of audience opportunity for people who are going to say, these are the issues, this is a stumbling block, this is why the carers are not just being listened to. And because otherwise all of our intentions are going to go nowhere. And so it's not a question of my saying, oh, it's all too big and too difficult, and local authorities are not going to move. It's just a real understanding of human nature, and our having to have a governance structure that gives some sort of strength to the unlocking element. And that's why I think it's going to be absolutely key that we somehow build in something that enables the unblockers to be listened to, the people who are saying, this is a stumbling block, do something about it.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Jane, for the presentation. I think that there's a clear view around the board that this is an opportunity. I mean, I see it, and I think we all have to see it not in isolation, but this is one of the 6 identifying characteristics of a sustainable healthcare system. It's not independent of any of the others. They're all very closely integrated. The first 2 around fashioning care around patients and the empowered patient, and wider primary care at scale, are closely integrated with this. So there's a greater complexity of change even than that which you've outlined this morning, because of the way in which we were going to need to press ahead on all 6. Secondly, you regard the Better Care Fund, I think, as the accelerant, as the catalyst, which can then bring about change also in the other areas. But the challenge, I think, is quite immense, not only for ourselves and for local government, but also for the acute sector, alongside 2 other elements of a new model towards elective care, and the concentration of specialised services in a smaller number of centres. So all of this proceeding together and at the same time through our own planning, through specialised commissioning and through the CCG plans, is an extraordinary process of change across the whole of the NHS. For me, the vision around the modern integrated care model lies at the heart of this, but the repercussions will be felt across each of the other 5 characteristics. So thank you for that, and I think you've got a pretty good consensus of view around the table, and the assurance I think that we need that the programme is aligned and proceeding in the right direction. I don't think it's entirely right to talk about doomsayers on the board, but actually this is fraught with risk. And it is our responsibility as the board charged with £100 billion of public expenditure to be fully aware of the risks and to ensure that we understand them and we understand the measures that are being taken to mitigate them and to manage them. Right, may we then turn please to item 7 on the agenda, which is the Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response System. Barbara, you have to introduce this, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. As everyone will know, the NHS has to be prepared for a broad range of emergencies which might befall us. It has to be prepared within itself, It has to be prepared to work closely with partners, particularly the police and other emergency services. It has to be prepared for a variety of circumstances, ranging from incidents such as the flooding in the southwest, where NHS services need to make a response, through to instances such as the episode when the theatre roof collapsed in London, or the helicopter incident in Glasgow, where of course the NHS in England would be on hand to support colleagues in other parts of the UK if necessary. We really mustn't underestimate the incredible amount of activity that goes on, both within the NHS itself and working with partners, to make sure that we really are resilient, and that we can respond and react to the circumstances. As the board will probably be aware, that these are the circumstances, the only circumstances when NHS England assumes a command and control responsibility. So in times of these emergencies, the routine relationships, partnerships, ways of working, ways of commissioning through contracting can be under prescriptively defined escalation processes, can be set aside, and NHS England becomes responsible for commanding and controlling that the NHS's response. So this paper really is to assure the board that NHS England itself has put itself in a position to take on that authority at times when it would be necessary, but it's also to assure the board of the work that we've been doing with the wider NHS to assure that it's in a position to respond. So, as I say, this is very much an assurance paper to the board in formal settings, although, as the chairman rightly pointed out, the board doesn't only receive its assurance through such a formal setting, and several weeks ago the whole of the board of NHS England visited the centre in Quarry House, where we have the full information and technology and media facility to use under such circumstances, and to gain their assurance from identifying the surroundings in which we would operate under just those circumstances. I think that it's very reassuring that the assurance level given in this paper is good, and that overall we can say we have good assurance that the NHS and NHS England is prepared, particularly given the changing environment and the reforms and the reorganisation. The paper also identifies some of the resources and some of the things that the guidance on our internet. But as well as the good assurance, I think we do need to note a small number of areas where we need to pay even greater attention. And we've identified working with clinical commissioning groups, supporting them to fully understand their responsibilities, because they're what's called a Category 2 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act. We know that we need to continue to be vigilant because of the change in the structures, although NHS England and its area teams and CCGs have now been in place for nearly a year. This is still relatively a new system, and we need to continue to be vigilant on that. We need to make sure that all training needs are addressed, and that everything is in place for appropriate collaboration in order to meet those training needs. And as NHS England itself, we need to be sure that our own internal business continuity plans are really robust. Just as an additional assurance to the board, in the last few days we've just agreed with Deloitte, our internal auditors. This is a sort of management assurance that Deloitte, our internal auditors, the piece of work that they will do to yet have another look at our assurance processes and make sure that they're comfortable and whatever they can recommend that we can improve. And also to be aware, we've identified some of the exercises that we go through, and as you will see with those, some of it is internal, but the vast majority of what we do is always with other agencies outside of health. So basically this is just to provide the board with assurance that emergency planning and preparedness is in a good place, but certainly one where we would never be complacent.
Thank you, Barbara. I'd like to invite comments from members of the board. Now, can I just say how much the board did appreciate the opportunity to visit the control centre, which I have to say gave us a lot of assurance that here was an organisation ready to react to things which by definition are completely unpredictable, come out of nowhere and require all the preparation and training that you've referred to this morning. So we were grateful for that opportunity and thank you for the report.
Can I'll just add, Malcolm, when I went to the West Midlands area team and talked to them about EPRR, it was very clear that there was a linkage between the area team and the centre, and people knew the handoffs that were going on, and if that's happening around the country, I think that's very reassuring as well.
Right, well, thank you. At this stage in the agenda, I propose that we take a 15-minute break, but coming up after the break is some of the most exciting business on the agenda. So may we adjourn for 15 minutes and return to business then. Thank you.